Good afternoon. We're running just a little late and we have a very tight schedule that you have to get through. But I'm aware that we sold on Eventbrite 220 tickets and we cut it off there because there's only 226 seats in the room. Now there's always people that, particularly on a day like this, might not make it. And there's always people that come when they even haven't registered. So I was just waiting, but now I think we really need to start. Okay, welcome to this event, which is being run by the Learned Society of Wales, our Learned Society, and Technocamps, which is a national program of outreach and engagement, particularly with schools, but community as well. It's headquartered here in Swansea, but it has hubs in every university across Wales. We also have the input of the Institute of Coding in Wales, which is a HEFCU-funded program. It's essentially the professional learning arm of Technocamps. It's interested in particular with digital skills, upskilling in companies, and with the problem of teacher and teacher education in the digital area, and EHP. You'll see a series of posters, banners here, advertising educational, historical, and philosophical foundations of computer science. This is a new research theme. It's essentially the research arm of Technocamps, but it's cross-disciplinary. It's founded just this year, headed by myself and Professor Tucker from the Computer Science Department and Professor Tom Crick from the Department of Education. But it has a growing community within the university interested in research into and about education, particularly in the digital sphere. So all of these organizations come together to host this event tonight, right? Furthermore, as I said, this is a new initiative. It's research theme. We intend on having, first of all, a series of banners which highlight famous scientists in this space, educational, philosophical, that have an intimate connection, ideally to Swansea, but at least to South Wales or Wales. So here's the first 4. We have a few more in the pipeline. I'll let you think about who these people are and what their connection to Swansea and Wales might be. All right? Okay. This year, we're celebrating 20 years as a nation. Well, 20-year anniversary of the National Assembly of Wales, or rather I should say Senate Cymru / Welsh Parliament, right? We all need to say that now. But from the Government of Wales Act 1998, powers were devolved from Westminster to Cardiff Bay, including education. So it's been 20 years since education has been run out of Cardiff Bay. But then since then, according to international measures, particularly PISA, the OECD PISA, which ranks countries across the world in terms of education. Every time you say PISA, a lot of people in education in Wales say, ooh, because it's been showing as slow but steady decline. There's some sort of problem in Wales that's been felt. Right? Now, education in Wales has followed essentially the same model. It's interlinked with England and based on the national curriculum is introduced by Kenneth Baker with the 1988 Education Act, all national curriculum. But there's something not right. There's something wrong in the state of Wales, right? And with mounting problems, something had to be done, it seemed. And some years ago, the education minister at that point, Hugh Lewis, decided to do something. He invited Professor Donaldson, a real leading expert in education and curriculum, to come and do a root and branch analysis of what's the situation in Wales. Think about curriculum and assessment in Wales. And that was in March 2014, and almost exactly 1 year later, he delivered his report. He gave his recommendations in a report called Successful Futures, a very ambitious title for a very ambitious agenda. Right? The report right away gathered cross-party acceptance. It was pleasing to see, and almost immediately the Minister of Education accepted all of its recommendations and said this is the way forward for Wales. So at the risk of stealing a bit of the thunder, I'll say just a bit about it. The report suggested that the curriculum is becoming overloaded, complicated, and outdated, and needs to be reformed, reinvented, based on 4 purposes. That the entire curriculum should be designed to ensure that all young people be ambitious, capable learners, enterprising, creative contributors, ethical, informed citizens, and healthy, confident individuals. Excellent objectives to ensure of every single young person across Wales. And I may know about it, that means everything. This is not going to be a curriculum that is going to be for talented stars, right? They're going to be taken care of. All of the talented, academically strong children will be catered for in this curriculum, but the curriculum is not for them. It's for every young person, right? And in that, guys, in that recognition is recommending that we move away from single subjects towards 6 thematic areas of learning and experience. For example, one is science and technology. That's the one that's dear to my heart, right? The quote there is that individual subjects should service the curriculum but not define it. Right? Now, that aside, my own subject, computer science, gets special mention in a way. Right? Digital skills get special attention in the report. In particular, it suggests that digital competence should be introduced as a cross-curricular responsibility. And we do now have the digital competency framework lying alongside the numeracy and literacy framework. So that was an early implemented success coming out of the report. And also said that computer science is to have a clear strand of learning within the science and technology AOLE, area of learning and experience. Computer science really is going to be introduced as its own recognized topic that is going to be studied through the whole curriculum from primary through to 16. Now, is this important and forward-looking? Absolutely. Just this week, 3 days ago, on Monday, OECD launched its Pset 2021 mathematics framework. 3 days ago, and arguably the greatest change. You look at that new framework, and it includes questions that test computational thinking. So in the report, their framework, quote, computer science and computational thinking, when taught well, can prepare students to apply problem solving, creativity, and collaboration in all sorts of domains. Right? So Pset 2021 is going to be the first assessment that really identifies how nations are doing, how well they're doing in embedding computer science in their education. Right? Now, with the digital competency framework, with the digital platform, the hub, these things that we're all leading in Wales, in the UK, on attention to teacher training in the computer science so that they can teach computer science, you really have the feeling that Wales is leading in this sphere, and Wales, for Pset 2021, will be ready. Okay. But as to the curriculum reform, right, so as I said, Hugh Lewis, as Education Minister, brought this up. And he said, yes, this is what we're going to do. And then pretty quickly he stepped down, and our new Minister of Education, Kirsty Williams, took her role in 2016 and had the daunting task of implementing the recommendations. Right? Not a problem. She didn't shirk away from this duty. She's going to oversee the transformation, but very much within a whole system reform. This isn't just about, let's just rewrite the curriculum and put it up there and schools have to do it. There is going to be a lot of collateral damage. If you do that, you have to make sure that the system is ready for it, in particular in terms of professional learning. So there's a whole system reform. And you really have to understand that when you look at the curriculum, right? So, otherwise, importantly, the new curriculum is co-constructed. It's not her department saying, okay, we look at this recommendation, and this is how it should look. Here you go, schools, do it. No. For 4 years, teachers have been writing this curriculum. Pioneer skills have been identified. Teachers from these pioneer schools have been identified to contribute. They meet regularly all over the nation. Regularly, they call in subject experts like myself as consultants to support their work. But over these many years, they've been working tirelessly, some in the minister's office, but these teachers regularly, intensely, even this week for the last 3 days in the Liberties Stadium yesterday. I spent the morning with them, and Professor Tucker spent the afternoon with them, supporting them. They're working very hard to get this curriculum right? It was published as a draft in April, put out for consultation. Anyone can feed in to the document. I provided some commentary that fed into a Technocamps response led by the Cardiff University Technocamps Hub, and I provided commentary that went into a Learned Society response provided by the head of the education group in the Learned Society. But in fact, 1,680 responses were received. This curriculum is really being looked at by a lot of people, and a lot of people have their opinions. Through many events like this, we try to hold to make sure that everyone, particularly all the stakeholders, are aware of this new curriculum and how it's coming. So they're working very hard, the curriculum reform group, to get it all polished, answer all of the responses, to have something that will be published in January 2020 so that it can be introduced in a phased manner from September 2022. As I said, this event is just a part of a series of making sure all stakeholders are always very aware of what's going on and able to feel that they're part of it. Okay? We're grateful that the ministers agreed. At this point, we decided almost a year ago we should do this. It would be a good point after the responses have been in and is looked at, have a good feeling for what it's going to look like. Let's reflect. Let's ask the minister if she would describe the curriculum, and ask Professor Donaldson if he might reflect on how well his recommendations from 5.5 years ago have been adhered to. Okay, so that's the purpose of this. And with that, I'd like to introduce the minister to the stage. My apologies, I should have welcomed our group in Bangor. This is being live streamed, put on an event in a theatre in Bangor University by the Technocamps Hub there. So with that, this is why you're going. You might be able to speak loudly, but not loud enough for them to hear you in Bangor.
I don't know. Give it a go.
This one,
I think so. Oh. Now that truly is the walk of shame, isn't it? There's many versions of the walk of shame, but that is the definition of the walk of shame. Nice of that, pawb. Good evening to everybody here, and good evening to everybody up in Bangor. And many thanks to Farron and colleagues at the IOC, Technocamps, the Learned Society, and the university here for the invitation to speak and for taking the time and trouble to organise the event. Now, if you don't mind me saying, I think the title for this evening is a very clever play on words, drawing on Professor Donaldson's chosen title for the original report, and then posing it as a question for what happens next. But if I'm completely honest, asking any politician to look towards a successful future is a very brave move. Even if you have full, unvarnished 2020 vision, because that now only means we're looking 3 months ahead. And seriously, even then, we've got Brexit to contend with, the possible impeachment of an American president, budgets in the Westminster and the Welsh Government, just a few things to contend with. However, I am confident that our ambitious and collective reform programme is delivering for now and for a very successful future. From reducing infant class sizes, through reforming the who, where and what of teacher training and development, to introducing an equitable and progressive student support system that is unique, not only to the UK, but unique to Europe. But of course, thinking about the medium or longer term future should be second nature to educators and educationalists, and even for those of us who have come to this world from politics and government. Now, many of you might know that I am a keen a student and follower of American history and American politics, and that during my university days, I spent a year at the University of Missouri. During that year, I volunteered on the first Bill Clinton presidential campaign. Actually, it's the last time the Democrats ever won that state. But I'm far too modest to think that my individual efforts were crucial in that regard. But of course, if you think back, if any of you are old enough, and there's lots of you in this room probably are not old enough to remember that presidential campaign, you will know that its theme song was Fleetwood Mac's Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. It projected a confidence, an ambition, and a commitment about the future, and a reminder that decisions made now are about moving forward and should never be about turning back the clock. And in our national mission for education reform in Wales, we are constantly thinking about tomorrow, about the road to 2022 and beyond. But we have been pounding that road already for a few years, and I believe that we're making the necessary hard yards. That having a comprehensive public education system is no barrier to partnering equality and equity with excellence. That all pupils are entitled to a broad and balanced curriculum that combines both knowledge with skills, and that together we believe in strong leadership, lifelong professional learning, and raising standards for all. So in my short time this evening, I hope to guide you through the how that we get to a successful implementation of a new curriculum, while seeking to explain why we're doing it now, who is involved in that process, and what it and the rest of our national mission education reforms mean for pupils, for parents, and the professionals who work alongside them. So to take those in turn, why now? I just reflected with Graham, what happens if I come into office and put the report in the bin? Only joking. Why now? It's because, and only because, we're getting the right foundations in place. The work of yesterday and today affords us the chance of more success tomorrow. This year, so for instance, for the first time ever, we outperformed England and Northern Ireland in A-level results. A higher proportion of Welsh A-level students got an A-star at A-level than any other region of England and in Northern Ireland. And when you think of the demographics of our nation, then that is a tremendous, tremendous achievement. There are record levels of part-time and postgraduate students accessing Welsh higher education and delivering social mobility and economic prosperity. And over the last 3 years, there has been a 50% increase in the number of students taking science GCSEs, with more students year on year gaining an A-star to C qualification in those GCSEs. So why are those things important? Are they important? I believe they are, because not only do they fundamentally transform the life chances and ambitions of those individual young people and their families from all backgrounds in Wales, they are an achievement which demonstrates that because we're raising standards for all and delivering a system that can enjoy public confidence, we are fit and we are ready to move forward with curriculum reform. And as we've just heard from Farron, that means moving away from narrow subjects to 6 broader areas of learning and experience, a curriculum which is purpose-based, for purposes that articulate the kind of citizens we need, and I would argue that we want, and a real focus on 3 core statutory skills: literacy, numeracy, and digital competence. To be brutally honest, I don't think we could deliver on these by just turning off onto a completely new highway without having, as I said, made some of those good miles already. It's why I took the decision to give us a longer lead time to the introduction of the curriculum and for it to be rolled out on a year-by-year group basis from 2022. We needed the fundamentals in place, and I listened very carefully to what professionals were telling me about the more time and resources for professional learning, more time for curriculum development, and to move away from a big bang approach where all schools would move from an old curriculum at the end of one academic year to a brand new curriculum for everybody at the start of a new academic year. Simply high stakes and high potential for jeopardy, especially for those towards the end of their educational journey in year 10 and 11. But let me be very, very clear. I absolutely am convinced that now is the time for the first ever truly made in Wales curriculum. One that was cooked up by the then Tory government in Westminster in the late 1980s is not fit for purpose for a contemporary Wales and for the learners of the future. Just think about it. 1988, a curriculum that was designed before the Berlin Wall was smashed into rubble. You know, that's not a strong foundation that we need for a knowledge-rich, adaptable skills and an entrepreneurial curriculum fit for 21st century citizens of Wales and the world. So who is on this journey with us? Well, at a national level and at a school level, the curriculum will prepare learners with a blend of knowledge, experience and skills, which empower them as citizens, but also of the employees and the employers of the future. The design of the new curriculum is the product, as we've heard from Farron, of a network of teachers working in national partnership with educational experts, the government, the regional educational consortia, universities, businesses, and many others. And many Learned Society Fellows have been involved in that journey, and colleagues such as Tom, who is here tonight, Farron, many others have been involved in the individual areas of learning and experience. Now, you will often hear Alan Wynne-Jones or Gareth Bell say that they are not a national team of 15 or 11 players, but one of 3.2 million. And I feel exactly the same way about the curriculum and our wider educational reforms. It's not by accident that I call it our national action plan, our national mission. Collective expertise, experience and energy are steering our way forward, learning from the very best elsewhere and shaping it and adapting it to meet the needs of pupils and teachers right here in Wales. So yes, we are on that road, but we are travelling it together, and I believe all sections of the system are reading from the same map. Of course, it all started with Graham's work, leading a national conversation about the curriculum. But with Graham's forgiveness, I don't think it is any longer the Donaldson curriculum, just in the way it's not Kirsty Williams's curriculum. It is a curriculum for Wales. It's of Wales, and it is by Wales. So, from the publication of the draft guidance earlier this year and continuing now through feedback and refinement from January 2020, and that work that will happen in areas across schools before 2022, we've not been afraid to take risks, to express opinions, to work collaboratively, to debate concepts and what matters, and to learn from experiences of others that have engaged in curriculum reform right the way across the world. And I have to say, I have been bowled over and truly heartened by the level of engagement that we have had to date in these processes. As Farron mentioned, over 6,000 members of the education workforce attended events in person. There were 62 National Mission Roadshow events, on top of the 120 events hosted by regional education consortia, and over 250,000 unique page views on Hub related to the curriculum. It really has been overwhelming to see people's willingness to engage. So, what will it mean in practice? Well, following the feedback over the summer, that refinement work is ongoing as we speak, and an updated and refined curriculum framework will be published in January. We've taken a great deal of time and been very careful to note all the feedback that has been received, especially on the issue of guidance, and we will be looking to ensure that new guidance is clearer and easier for teachers to use and engage with. The detail of each area of learning and experience is being refined within and across expert groups, and we are also updating the what matters statements that are there. If you're not familiar with it, they're there to capture the big ideas and the concepts in each area of learning. But I must stress that the publication of the revised and refined framework in January is certainly not the end of the story. From then to the start of the rollout in September 22, it will evolve and respond as individual teachers and schools develop their own practice and pedagogy. Academics, teachers, experts and others, I believe, will seize the opportunity of producing new resources to support the curriculum and its individual components. And to do that, that will require engagement from you here tonight and networks that you are involved in. Of course, in any discussion about the curriculum, there are the usual questions about the future of qualifications. I'm yet to go to a curriculum event. Well, somebody has said, yes, but that's all very well, but what about GCSEs? In the autumn in November, I believe they're about to do it. In November, Qualifications Wales will be consulting on the impacts of curriculum reform, on what that will mean for GCSEs and other qualifications that students take at the end of their compulsory schooling. So again, there's yet another opportunity to get involved in shaping that conversation about the future of of qualifications. Now, I referred earlier to the building blocks that I believe that we have put in place to successfully deliver the new curriculum and what will be a new education system. But all of my reforms are focused on three main ambitions: to raise standards, to close the attainment gap, and to deliver an education system that is a source of national pride and enjoys the confidence of the people of Wales. So, across our action plan and in delivering a new curriculum, we are resourcing a high-quality profession backed up by the biggest single financial investment in teachers since devolution, looking to develop inspirational leaders, and for the first time providing dedicated support training and a national network for heads and those who aspire to leadership in our system. A strong focus on well-being, equity and excellence, significantly increasing investment in pupils from our most disadvantaged backgrounds to ensure that they have the best possible start, and to develop a robust accountability system. This isn't an accountability-free area. All of us are accountable every day for our professional actions and how we choose to do our jobs, and this system cannot be free of principles of accountability. But we want an accountability system that will ensure that we measure the progress of every single child and to give leaders more autonomy in how they improve teaching and learning in their schools. So, as I hope you can gather, a lot has been done, but the reality is there is a huge amount more still to do, especially in addressing one of the age-old criticisms of devolution politics, the so-called implementation gap. So we have got a big job of work to do to ensure that we will move from the principles around our new curriculum into successful implementation in our schools. But as daunting as sometimes, as I'm sure it may seem to professionals out there, we can't and we mustn't stop thinking about tomorrow. For that truly successful future, then the responsibility is ours. It's us. Those of us here in this room, those of us listening and watching in from Bangor. Right across Wales, it is us who have the opportunity to shape that tomorrow for all of our young people. Our national mission belongs to each and every one of us. Each parent, each carer, each teacher, each member of support staff, and everybody that benefits from an enterprising and educated future workforce. It's not always easy to move forward together, and building a curriculum and a system based on cooperation and partnership. It can be messy. It's taken time. It can be uneasy at certain points. But as the old proverb says, if you want to go quickly, then go it alone. If you want to go far, then go together. I believe that we're moving at a fair pace, but we're also taking the time to ensure that we continue to work with the profession, building a culture of shared ownership, of high standards for all, and of truly combining knowledge, skills, and experience, of not writing any child off, or anywhere off, and ensuring that our educational system belongs to each and every citizen. So many thanks for listening and for inviting me here this evening. And if you're curious to see what Professor Donaldson says, well, I'm very curious too. He's been a continued partner through this entire journey, and I'm grateful for his continued support for the mission. Diolch yn fawr.
While we swap the microphones over, I just wanted to make sure that you all have spotted, obviously you spotted the Twitter handles and hashtags. Let the world know what we're up to, as you wish, right? Professor Donaldson.
This just clips on, does it? It's the first challenge of the evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Bangor, where we are up there. Yeah. I want to do two or three things in the short time that I have available. I want to say a little bit, just picking up on what the Minister was saying at the start, and just reinforce why this matters. You know, this is not just the latest wheeze that's been dreamed up to deaf teachers throughout Wales. This is something that really matters, and I want to say a little bit about why I think that it is so important. I want to say a little bit about some of the key differences and key features I think that there are, but I'll not go into that in any detail. And then I want to just finish by trying to address a few myths that are around. Certainly, if you look at what Twitter says this reform is about, then it goes in about 50 different directions simultaneously. So I want to just address a couple of those myths, and then give my take on where we are and how ready we're going. So that's 20 minutes worth of what I'm going to try and do. Why do they matter? Why do the reforms matter so much? The world is engaged in a debate about why kids go to school. Across the world, country after country is asking the question about what can we best do for young people during the relatively short time they're at school that can equip them for who knows what, for a world where they're going to live through the entirety of this century and many of them well into the next century. So what do we do during that short time at school that can build the kind of people who are going not just to cope but to thrive in a world that, whatever happens, we know will be characterized by deep and fundamental change as just a way of life. That's what's going to happen. So what is it? What are the implications of that for how young people experience school education and what that does for them? And that's why this curriculum is not an attempt to fix the 1988 curriculum. It's not. I think when Hugh Lewis asked me to do the review, I think he might have thought I was going to try and fix the 1988 curriculum, but I did get the agreement, his agreement, at that time that the review would be as radical as it needed to be. And it was pretty clear to me after a very short time in looking at and talking to colleagues, staff, students, wider community across Wales, but also engaging with the kind of thinking that's taking place internationally, that the job wasn't to try and limit the damage, the job wasn't to try and plug the gaps, but the job was to actually think a bit more fundamentally about the aspirations that we have for our young people and how we can best realize those aspirations, as I say, during that relatively short time they're in school. So what we have, what across the world, this is not unique to the UK, what we have across the world is increasingly a curriculum in country after country which is becoming overloaded, because as we deal with the nature of change that's taking place both in society and the wider economy, the tendency is for we respond to that by putting more and more things into the curriculum. So, and it reaches breaking point through that. But also in a period where both the scale, the scope, and the pace of change is the way it is just now, there is an inevitable time lag in terms of what we're teaching our young people and the reality of what's happening out there in the world. So how do you square that circle? How do you we don't know what the future is going to bring, so what is it we do with young people while they're at school that tries not to be getting better and better at teaching them things that are less and less relevant? And you could say that over the course of the last 20 years, that's actually the journey we've been on. We've been trying to get better and better at teaching things that are less and less relevant. So again, a fundamental question for the nature of what we do with young people while they're at school. What's the nature of the curriculum? Another reason why I think this reform in Wales is so important is because it's learning the lessons, the very hard lessons, of the rather sad story of educational change. Again, internationally, if we look at the gap between aspiration and reality, that's a huge gap in terms of the educational reforms that were undertaken, what it was they thought they were going to do, and the reality of what young people experience in the classroom. So Wales has tried to learn the lesson of how do you go about a transformational reform in a way that actually means that every child in every classroom, in every school, in every part of Wales is going to benefit from that reform. And how do we do that in a way that learns the lessons of where we've been, our understanding about educational reform. And the Minister talked about standards, and that's so important because our young people are going to require to be able to have learning which is both relevant, but also that the quality of what they learn and the way in which they have risen to the challenges embedded in that learning means that they are well equipped for the kind of future that we're talking about. But the risk in standards, the risk in the standards agenda, is that if we define it purely in terms of those things we measure, what we do is to reduce what we mean by standards to a tiny subset of what a good education means. So again, one of the challenges in the curriculum is how do you set standards, how do you approach the standards agenda in a way that does justice to a good education, an education that genuinely is equipping young people for the future, and we don't have a debate about standards which becomes reduced to 2 or 3 measures that somehow or other define the whole of what school education is meant to be about. So I could go on. There's a whole host of other factors that are at work in terms of thinking about the nature of the curriculum. But the kind of things that are happening here in Wales just now, as I say, are part of a worldwide discussion that's taking place. The OECD has got what it calls its 2030 project. OECD previously didn't get involved in the curriculum, but the pressure on the OECD from countries, member countries, has been for them increasingly to start to engage much more directly in thinking about the nature of the curriculum. Their 2030 project, and I know from talking to colleagues in the OECD, is in many ways reflecting the kind of things that Wales has already embarked on. In many ways, the kind of thinking that's emerging from that 2030 project, it would reaffirm the fact that the journey that Wales is on just now in terms of educational reform is foursquare at the centre of the way in which thinking is going internationally about the curriculum. I'm not going to go into the mechanics, the specifics of what the curriculum is about. Some of that has been referred to earlier. If I could say, probably the single most important thing about the new curriculum, if you take away nothing else from what I say to you in this 20 minutes, the single most important thing about this curriculum is it's about purposes. Because if you talk to people about the curriculum, they tend to think about the curriculum is the nature of what's covered in subjects inside the curriculum. So the curriculum becomes syllabus. The curriculum and syllabus become synonymous. And what you then do is get into a process of how do we define what kids should learn, and then how do we ensure that all of that is covered. Now that's all, nothing wrong with that in general terms. But what this curriculum is about ensuring that what young people experience in school, what they learn, what they're going to take away from their time at school, relates to more fundamental purposes about why they're at school and what we hope to achieve through the time at school. So it's a curriculum that's driven by purposes, not driven by coverage. And up until now, we've tended to have a curriculum that's driven by coverage. We define the coverage, we define what's in each of the bits that we expect to cover, and then schools engage in a process of implementing, delivering the nature of coverage. Now, a lot of what happens in that is very important and very good, but the fundamental, it's partly why that leads to overload, is because you need some kind of lodestone. You need some kind of way of determining what really matters in terms of the curriculum. If you want to think about how you decide what matters, you have to have a strong sense of purpose. And those 4 purposes which emerged from the discussions that Wales had over the course of that period, 2014 to 2015, are right at the heart of what this curriculum is about. And I'm just so pleased that that has been sustained in the way in which Wales has taken this forward. Because every curriculum reform has got a statement of aims. I mean, you can always find a statement of aims. Grandiose aims, very worthwhile aims. But when the reform's underway, if you ask people what were the aims of this reform, they kind of scratch their head and they don't, because what it's become, the reform has become about the specifics of the technicalities of how you deliver a curriculum. And the laudable aims, the reason why you were doing this in the first place, has tended to get lost. Consistently, you can see it in the National Mission Statement, you can see it in the way in which Wales has addressed this. Those purposes have remained as drivers, have remained right at the heart of reminding us all why this matters, why it is that we're trying to do what we're doing. So if we think about the way in which this curriculum has developed, the work of that's enormously powerful and impressive work that's been undertaken by colleagues across Wales over the course of the last 2 or 3 years through the pioneer schools, and not just the pioneer schools, but I've been in lots of schools that weren't pioneers, that are doing incredibly exciting things in terms of taking the opportunity that's been offered by this reform in order to think the unthinkable, in order to say, actually, well, for the first time in my professional career, we're actually being asked to think more fundamentally about what children should be learning, rather than just simply being told your job is to teach them this, teach them specific things that have been defined by somebody else. So purposes, right at the heart of the curriculum. Drivers, they decide what we teach, they decide how we teach, they decide what we assess. They're the drivers, and they should define standards as well. They should define the nature of what we mean by standards. They should relate back to those purposes. So the new curriculum is different from the 1988 curriculum, not for the sake of being different, but because it's designed to be forward-looking and to address the new challenges that we all face on a day and daily basis. So you partly address overload because you're thinking about purposes, and that can help to have a winnowing effect. You partly address overload through the what matters approach that the pioneer schools have adopted. That helps that process of thinking about not just a mile wide, inch thick curriculum where the quantity is what defines the curriculum. It's thinking about what really matters. How do we ensure consolidation in a young person's learning? My own view from a rather long career in terms of working in education is, Farron, you talked about maths and science, that area of the curriculum. I think one of the big problems we have in terms of why so many young people are prepared to say that I don't like maths or I'm turned off from maths is because as the further they go, if the foundations are not sound, if we haven't really established the foundations of mathematical thinking, then they begin to feel inadequate as they move through into the more complex aspects of mathematics. So creating the space and the opportunity to really get the fundamentals right, to make sure that young people have got the conceptual structure, have got the knowledge, have got the skills that allows them to engage with increasing complexity as they move through their school careers, is right at the heart of what this curriculum is about. The time lag issue, if the way in which you keep the curriculum relevant is, every 10 or 15 years you have a big bang reform, that's not going to work in the context of a process where the world is changing at the pace that our world is changing it. So the only way in which we can have a curriculum that remains relevant is if the decisions, more of the decisions about what young people should be learning are taken closer to the point of learning. So you don't have something done centrally that somehow or other you've then got to persuade an entire nation that they ought to be doing it. So that the process, recommendation and successful futures about subsidiarity, and subsidiarity means you don't start from the top and say, what can we let the schools do? You start the other way around. You say, let's assume the schools are doing the right thing. To what extent do we have to intervene? what do we have to do to put in place those things that ensure necessary consistency across Wales? So there are distinct things about what it means to be educated in a Welsh school. But you don't do that to the nth degree. You have to decide where the balance lies between those things which should be characteristic for every young person in Wales in terms of their education, and those things which are organically driven by the needs of the local community, the needs of the pupil, and the changing needs of society more generally. And the process that we've got through the flexibility that's in the curriculum, through focusing on fundamentals, through thinking about subsidiarity in the way that I've just talked about, are very important ways in which we can help to ensure that we don't get this huge lag, you know, where the curriculum gets further and further behind, and then you need a big, massive transformational change, and then the same thing happens again for the next 10 or 15 years. A critical part of what the reform is trying to do is to create sufficient space within the curriculum for young people to experience the kind of pedagogy, the kind of approaches to learning, the kind of experiences which bring learning to life and make young people learn because learning is fun, because learning, the satisfaction you get from engaging with challenge, and you may not get it first time, but you keep going, and that the intrinsic satisfaction that comes through that learning process is what it means to be a lifelong learner. If you've only learned because you're going to be tested and you want to get a good mark in the test, or you want to get the good mark in the qualification, then you've got that kind of instrumental view of learning. What we're trying to do in the new curriculum is to create the context within which we can create more opportunity for the intrinsic satisfaction that young people can get from engaging with things that are really intriguing, challenging, sometimes complex, and you stick with it even when it's difficult. If you want them to do that, you've got to create enough space. You can't just simply keep on multiplying the things that they've got to learn. You've got to focus on the fundamentals and create enough space for that to be addressed in a way that allows young people to really get satisfaction from learning. Whole host of other things. Tom's coming next, and I'm already biting into his time, so I'll try and draw this to a close, but just saying two or three things. The myths that are around, I think, and it's a real risk in reform, is that the myths become the reality, that what people think it's about become actually what it is about, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the kind of things that I've seen is, this is a knowledge-free curriculum. Just it's all about skills and experiences. Knowledge doesn't matter. Nothing could be further from the truth, and it's a naive view in any case, as if knowledge and skills are somehow or other in separate compartments. So the trick is, as I say, to decide how you create that fundamental conceptual structure, that core of knowledge that young people need in order for them then to move on and acquire the kind of things that they need to acquire beyond that, but also that they can then apply and use that knowledge through a whole variety of different skills that go with that. So knowledge matters. Another myth is that somehow all this is a free-for-all. You know, that anything a school does is automatically right. That's not true either. There's less prescription, significantly less prescription in the curriculum as it's emerging just now. But there remain bottom lines that have to be integral to what good quality education looks like. So this is not a kind of free-for-all within which there are no expectations there. Another big one is that this somehow or other is a primary reform. Doesn't actually. Secondaries are all about qualifications, and this is for primaries. Again, it's so important that those purposes and the kind of experiences that young people are getting, the foundations that are being built, are carried forward throughout the entirety of the period of formal education, and hopefully subsequently into what we value through qualifications in due course. And that was the reason that the Successful Futures recommended that we stop chunking education into key stages. Stop saying, you know, for some reason, when kids reach a certain age, we suddenly shift to a different way of thinking about education, from foundation phase to key stage 2, from key stage 3 to key stage 4, and so on. We need to think much more about flow in terms of a young person's learning, much more about the way in which progression, that we think about progression as something that's starting when they move into the earliest stages of schooling and preschooling, and that runs right through to the point at which they are moving into the next stage in their lives. And the other one is about the role of subjects. Farron, as you said, when you quoted from Successful Futures, the difference in this reform is not that subjects don't matter, but subjects don't define the curriculum, they serve the curriculum. They serve those four purposes. And the challenge for subject experts, people who've got this huge expertise in subjects, particularly in secondary schools, which matter, their expertise is of critical importance. The challenge is, how do I use that expertise in order to serve these broader purposes, rather than the expertise being locked up in relation to a very narrow way of thinking about the nature of my subject. My subject has got to relate to something broader in terms of a young person's learning. How are we doing, just to finish, in terms of how it looks to me, and it's only me at this stage, and it's only in terms of the kind of contacts I'm having with the process. Whoever asked about that, my stock answer is so far so good. So far so good, but there's a long way to go. I remain, I'm worried now about using the phrase cautiously optimistic, because I think that's been slightly devalued in terms of some of the discussion that's taking place now around Brexit. But anyway, I am cautiously optimistic about where we are just now, but acutely aware that the difficult bit of this reform is what happens next. Because the difficult bit is not creating some kind of construct which, if you take it in isolation, can be the best construct in the world, but it doesn't become a reality in classrooms throughout Wales, and it might as well not have it in the first place. So the next bit of how we translate our ambition into reality for young people is the critical thing. I think the national mission, I think the fact that it's located the curriculum in the context of enabling objectives, it's understood that if you really want to bring about transformational change, you've got to invest in the teaching profession. You've got to invest in teachers having both the confidence and the competence to be able to take the opportunities which this new curriculum offers. We don't do that, the default position will be something where you end up with something that's not a million miles away from what we've got just now. It's old wine in new bottles, and you just call it something different, but nothing's really changed at the end of the day. So investing in the teaching profession, investing in leadership, retaining the vital element of accountability, which is an essential part of being a public servant. For goodness sake, the kind of things we are doing for young people means we have to be accountable for what we do. It's far too important not to be accountable. The trick is to have accountability which is robust in terms of the nature of the accountability, but not oppressive in terms of the way in which it operates. And that's the challenge, I think, which Wales is engaging in just now. How do we retain robust accountability, but avoid the oppressive features of some of the mechanisms that have been used in the past and are used elsewhere? And finally, I think because of the way in which this curriculum has been developed, the approach to co-construction, the fact that wherever you are in Wales, you're not too far away from a pioneer school. You're not too far away from a school that has actually been involved in this, or teachers who've been involved in this in greater depth. So the development process has become an important part of making this a reality. Because instead of the expertise lying in Cardiff or lying somewhere else, wherever you are in Wales, you're not too far away from a school or colleagues that can work with you and help you to understand and develop the kind of confidence that will allow Wales, the teachers of Wales, to take the opportunities that this new curriculum offers. So, cautiously optimistic. I think, I know that internationally, this sounds a bit overblown, but the world is watching Wales. I'll tell you that. The world is watching Wales. There's a lot of what's happening here just now that is of immense interest. And the fact that the OECD are devoting so much time to wanting to work with Wales is not just because they're doing it for a favour to Wales. They want to learn from what's happening here in Wales, and they want to be part of it. And that's a pretty good signal. Thank you.
Did you get the speaker? free to speak. So, as I said, this is a co-constructed curriculum. Very regularly, there's a group of teachers, particularly for 3 days. It seems it's always 3 days, and always one day they invite me as an expert advisor. So one day of the 3 days, there's expert advisors in there, and we enter the room. It's one day when we're there, not just the teachers. Always a constant seems to be, always a constant seems the same sort of teachers, that they're all very eager, they're very enthusiastic, wanting to get this right. And another constant, I was going, obviously I'm in the science and technology group. So as I said, this week it was in Liberty Stadium the last 3 days. Yesterday, I could only do the morning, so I tag teamed with Professor Tucker, and I left and he came for the afternoon. We always see the same, our colleague from the Institute of Physics is there advising on the teachers and getting the physics aspect right. But the constant in the room is always Tom. So, Tom, is there, you'll all know, oh, he's one of our colleagues, all of our colleagues here from the university. So he's our colleague, he's a professor with education a bit in computer science. But more than that, while he's here, is he leads on the area of learning experience for science and technology. So he's in the room for these 3 days every time they're meeting, very regularly, every couple of months. I've been to the Metro Hall, I've been up to Landrudno a couple of times, in Thursday, all over. He's always there 3 days. Typically just in the background, he's not there for us to tell him what it has to look like. But he's wandering around table to table and and helping them.
Spoil my talk.
Oh, is that? Well, I didn't realize either. Because he comes in and helps them formulate their ideas and how they should think about things. So I thought, and he agreed to come and spend 10 minutes to give you a vision of how it is that for this 1 of 6, the area of learning and experience for science and technology, how things actually work on the ground with the teachers and the curriculum reform. Thank you, sir.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Nos bydd bawb, croeso. The unenviable task of following the Minister and Graham Donaldson. So I'm trying to give a bit of a whistle-stop tour of, I suppose, what's been happening over the past 2 years. So that picture was when I started involved in curriculum reform. I've obviously aged horrifically, so I'm going to keep using that for another few years. I suppose partly reflecting on specifically the science and technology area of learning experience, but I've been involved with some of the curriculum reform stuff in Wales for a long time, so hopefully this can kind of map some of that journey from it's 6 years nearly to the a couple of weeks ago to when I chaired the ICT review of the ICT curriculum, and then that kind of fed into Graham's review, and then obviously the output, one of the first outputs was the digital competence framework, so that was delivered in September 2016. Obviously now thinking about the shaping and the development of the science and technology area of learning experience. So I'm going to probably cut across both from a national policy level, but also some of the practicalities of developing the AOLE, the Science and Tech AOLE over the past 2 years. And I suppose looking ahead then from the cautiously optimistic, and I agree because this is the 3rd day of 3 we've spent at the Liberty Stadium, and where we are for publishing the curriculum in January. So this is the big opportunity for science, for a rethink of science and technology education in Wales, particularly from me as a computer scientist, as a sort of disciplinary background, that real focus around doing young people a disservice for not equipping them with the skills for the future. And that's not just economically driven, but societally and culturally driven around, particularly for digital skills, but more generally, how do we develop a scientifically and technologically literate citizenry? So not just, we are clearly deeply focused about creating future scientists and engineers and technologists, but actually we want everyone to recognise that understanding science and technology is a key part of being a citizen of Wales, but also it's sort of an intrinsic part of our society and culture. So actually it's not just something that other people do and we perhaps enjoy the benefits in Wales. There is a people and place in Wales. There is an important historical context. There's kind of curriculum Cymraeg, understanding the contributions of Wales to science and technology over the past 300 years, and actually hopefully for the years coming ahead. Clearly, there are some challenges around bringing together 5 seemingly, quite different disciplines, so physics, chemistry, biology, design and technology, and computer science, into one coherent and cohesive area learning and experience. And that's both in the sense of how these subjects are currently delivered in school, their priority, their profile, and actually, probably more importantly, the perception of these subjects. So what do kids think about these? What do parents think about these subjects? What do the general public think around science and technology more generally? So how do we shift that perception that it's not just geeky boys who do science? Actually, you know, for a 3 to 16 curriculum, we want everyone to enjoy and understand science and technology, but actually then the diversity of post-compulsory routes too. Clearly, there's an economic imperative. You know, notwithstanding, everyone's mentioned Brexit, so I will. So notwithstanding the potential future for Wales, clearly, if you look at Welsh government policy, you look at UK government policy, this is fundamental to where we see Wales and the UK in the next 15, 20 years. So the kind of science innovation underpinning our future economy is predicated on having the skills and the expertise to do this kind of stuff. So all the way from prosperity for all, from a Welsh government perspective, from the UK industrial strategy, look at the kind of the great technologies that are underpinning sort of scientific and innovation development. But we need people in Wales with that skills and expertise. And more importantly, we need the economy and industry that's in Wales doing this kind of stuff. So there's a catch-22 around, you know, we want the skills here, so people will come here and bring high-value industry to Wales. So this is all interlinked. This isn't just an education and skills piece. There is a wider cross-governmental aspiration for where we want Wales to be in, say, 2050. The challenges and opportunities, I think both Graham and Kirsty have kind of mentioned some of the, you know, this is an innovative way, this is a radical and innovative way for curriculum development in Wales, but in the UK. So the idea of this co-constructed, you know, heavily engaged practitioners developing the curriculum is unique, certainly. This has not been done in the UK before. And actually, even reflecting on when I chaired the DCF back in 2015, I can honestly say practitioners probably didn't believe they were going to be involved in doing this. So even when we turned up, I remember we met in Cardiff City Hall in October 2015, there was a blank sheet of paper, and I think practitioners thought that we were going to magic up something in a couple of months' time. And I think maybe that idea sustained all the way through the curriculum development process. So, you know, there was a secret room in Welsh Government in Cardiff that they were going to then magically present the curriculum at some stage through this process. But actually, you saw that kind of cultural shift, the sort of theory of change and the mindset change around actually this was being developed by the practitioners and was made in Wales for Wales, and actually was addressing unique cultural, economic, societal context that we need, that we recognise as a uniqueness for education in Wales. There are challenges, and there have been challenges. It's not, you know, like I said, I've aged horrifically, and I think some of my science and tech pioneers have aged horrifically too. But that kind of cathartic sort of, you know, the process that we've gone through over this period, it's been, you know, it feels like we've been going backwards, we've gone round in circles, but actually that constant progress, or the thinking about the end goal, you know, not just thinking about delivering a science and technology area of learning experience, addressing the challenges of the 5 sort of component disciplines, but actually seeing this is one of 6 areas of learning and experience. This is one of, you know, supports one of 3 cross-curricular skills. This is delivering against the 4 purposes of the new curriculum for Wales. So you see these different levels in which it all stitches together to present, you know, it's not just about delivering a good science and technology area of learning experience, it's about being part of a coherent curriculum which then is fit for all learners in Wales. And I suppose specifically from a computer science perspective, from a digital practice perspective, that's something that I've been specifically worried about as we've seen that shift from ICT into computer science, and particularly with the digital competence framework. There's raising expectations for what we would expect young people when we think about digital competency. We recognise the challenges of living in a digital, data-driven, computational world. There's some stuff in the press this week around schools banning mobile phones. So kind of what does that mean around the message of saying these things are intricately interwoven into our lives? How do we prepare people for living in this kind of world? So the other side of that is how do we also prepare practitioners for having the right digital pedagogies and practice across the entire curriculum, across all subjects, to effectively, you know, for high quality learning and teaching. So, you know, digital practice is not the preserve of the ICT teacher. This is about modern learning and teaching. This is about high quality assessment. It's about understanding about how you effectively teach every subject, both from science and technology through to the humanities and health and well-being and the expressive arts. So actually, how do we think more holistically around what does it mean to be a teacher in Wales? Again, we've asked these fundamental questions around the national mission. What do we want to achieve from education in Wales? Well, actually, what does it mean to be a teacher in Wales? What's that contribution, and how is that valued more generally? Clearly, that's important for Swansea University with our School of Education. We have initial teacher education starting from September 2020. I imagine there are colleagues from other IT providers in Wales. We all care about producing the next generation of teachers, and also we want to support the current generation of teachers to manage that transition from the current curriculum to the new. So that big focus on high quality professional learning to upskill, both from a subject knowledge perspective, but also from a pedagogic knowledge perspective. And I think, Kirsty mentioned the challenges of qualifications. That's been very, very clear for science and technology, because there is a big focus on what do the GCSEs look like, or what do the A-levels look like, or maybe more accurately, what do the level 2 quals look like, and what do the level 3 quals look like. There are so many qualifications in this area that actually what's the offering to students and learners, what's the offering from schools to their pupils, and what's best for those pupils. And actually trying to, I think we are thinking about that in the context of what would we want education to achieve in Wales. Actually, we have to rethink what do we want to achieve from qualifications. So it's not just about having badges that take you on to the next step. I think that meaningful, kind of thoughtful questioning around what should qualifications achieve? What's the point? Is it about just getting A star to C passes, or actually is it that deep understanding and you have experiences, you've got knowledge and skills, and you can then apply them into a variety of different contexts going forwards, which is that's what we would want young learners to be, because that's the shifting nature of the world in which they're going to be joining, both from a work perspective but also from a societal and cultural perspective. So I think the interdisciplinarity piece has certainly been challenging. About it's not just about squishing together 5 subjects into this science and technology area of learning and experience, particularly when you look at the differences between, say, the physical sciences, the empirical sciences, through to the technical, logical, theoretical sciences, and actually the way in which you can go from abstract to concrete, or concrete to abstract, the way in which the nature of evidence, the way in which proofs are constructed, the way in which knowledge is constructed across that AOLE is diverse and broad. But there is a coherent approach to how all these fit together. And interestingly, people read the what matters statements in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they can identify a very clear primary domain and say, that's the physics one. But actually, when you start to dig a bit deeper, that might be a physics one. Then also it would have a secondary and a tertiary domain for it all to fit in a much more interdisciplinary way. So, I think that's been some of the big conceptual challenges for our AOLE group, is to successfully bring together these 5 disciplines and actually then have very rigorous progression across the 5 progression steps, but also that continuum from 3 to 16, and then preparing learners for qualifications and post-compulsory study, or work, or diversity of routes at the age of 16. So looking ahead, I'm going to link to another piece of legislation, I suppose, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that idea about new models, new ways of working. What's the opportunity for education in Wales? Especially when we link back to the 4 purposes about creating future citizens of Wales. Well, this is scary. There are big changes coming. There have been big changes already. But essentially, this probably is a call to arms in some respects. This is the biggest change to education in Wales ever. I know clearly since devolution, but but certainly we can say ever. And actually, what should be our focus going forward? So the idea that once the curriculum is published in January 2020, that wasn't another. I suppose that's another key milestone in the successful delivery of the curriculum. But that again is another starting point. So that it doesn't end there by our role doesn't end in January, and nor does the curriculum pioneers' role end in January. So what does that mean around how do we get that systemic change for delivering this new curriculum and making it successful for all learners across all of Wales? And I suppose the challenge the call to arms is certainly, so I recognise there is a diverse audience here tonight. I think there is a massive contribution from, I suppose, the STEM ecosystem more generally. So there's both universities have a massive role to play, both from an initial teacher education perspective, from schools of education in Wales, but as well as, particularly subject disciplinary areas. So, we have, particularly at Swansea, we have significant science engineering expertise. What's our contribution to producing future science and technology teachers? How do we effectively recruit and retain those teachers going forwards? And again, I wholeheartedly applaud the ministerial commitment to significant investment in the professional development of teachers. So that big professional learning commitment is, that will underpin the success of the new curriculum. So how do we value and improve the quality, the competence and capability of teachers in Wales to successfully deliver this new curriculum? And that's hugely important for the science and technology area of learning experience. And I think, as all the pieces are fitting together, again, cautiously optimistic, once the curriculum is in place, we will then have this wider ecosystem working together to support high quality education system in Wales. So, I know there are probably some trainee teachers here. I know there are some current teachers here, and I know there are colleagues certainly from my university, but a range of other universities. We've all got a role to play, and I suppose it's beholden on us to ensure that we can all play our part. So, diolch yn fawr iawn, and looking forward to the next couple of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you all our speakers. We're going to have a little period of question and answer. I don't know if you want to. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'm going to invite the three here to sit down and go through it. First, I want to know, there's a little card. The Learning Society likes to give an idea of the nature of the people that attend their events, right? So I'm guessing, are you in industry? Right, tick boxes, right? And also a little column for what did we do? Is event useful or informative? They like to take these statistics and records of their events. But before you take, no, it wasn't, I didn't get any of my questions answered. If that's the case, I invite you to ask that question now. Maybe you'd like to say who you are and where you're at.
Sure. So I'm Scott from Bridgend College. Really like the talks, and I think you have a really good vision. I think it's really nice. I was just wondering on your thoughts about why you stopped at 16 and didn't continue the reform up to 18. I just wondered on thoughts on that.
That was my remit. So it was the period of compulsory education. That's what I was asked to look at, relating back to the national curriculum of 1988 and the pressures that were building up on school education. But interestingly, there's been a lot of interest, I think, from the post-school sector in terms of how do we get the articulation right. If those purposes matter up to the age of 16, they surely matter thereafter. And therefore, I think there is a longer-term discussion about the relationship between what's happening in schools and the nature of what happens wherever youngsters go thereafter.
So I think what lots of colleagues in FE are interested in, whether that be FE out of a college or sixth form practitioners, is this nervousness that there is nothing that happens in curriculum reform up to 16 that then makes the job more difficult. And I think what's really important, you've heard a lot about the pioneers and the AOLE groups. There have been representatives from FE in every single one of those areas of learning and experience that have been able to feed in to the work and to ensure, as I said, that for those students who want to then pursue a particular area of learning and experience, there is nothing that has happened up to the age of 16 that will prevent them from progressing. Interestingly, as well, apart from doing curriculum reform, we're also doing Pset reform in Wales. So I'm sure many of you hopefully have been part of the consultation on the abolishment of HEFCU and the creation of a commission for tertiary education and research in Wales. And only today we were looking at how we can ensure that the principles of the Future Generations and Wellbeing Act is reflected in our Pset reforms, and how we could use outcome agreements and registration criteria to further look at some of these issues around the public good and active citizenship. So although there won't be curriculum reform in that sense, you know, these values, you know, hopefully you'll see reflected in Pset reform also.
I concur.
I should also say we are looking at doing a little bit of work, commissioning a little bit of work, and I don't want to set any hairs running, but you'll be aware that there was a recent debate in the Assembly about raising the school leaving age, and we are actually doing a little bit of work to look at actually what's the evidence base to raising the school leaving age, and what would, you know, just a theoretical piece of work. Don't say that I'm about to do this, but just in response to that debate, simply asking the question about whether ending compulsory education at 16 is the right thing to do, or is there a different way?
Hi, it's Spencer John from the Campus for Life Foundation. Question to the three of you, two questions really. First question, how much engagement have there been with the children themselves for the formation of the new curriculum? And then number two, there's a lot of research and evidence that supports it's not necessarily what the child learns in school that's the key differentiator in academic success, but rather what children of low socio-demographic backgrounds don't experience during holiday time. What thought has been given to that, and is there any support or consideration of that in the new curriculum? Question to three of you.
So I suppose addressing your first question, I mean, I think there's been significant involvement from, I suppose, a learner voice, a pupil voice perspective, engagement from the Children's Commissioner for Wales, and how that fits to specific parts of the curriculum, but more generally the aspirations of the curriculum, how it links to the four purposes. So I suppose there's been a variety of engagement across the 6 areas of learning experience. I mean, we've done some stuff specifically for science and technology with a range of different, I suppose, as part of that expert broader engagement, there's been a variety of groups and organisations who've been involved. I think, I mean, even sort of the thinking around the curriculum, so how is it understandable to learners? So the idea that this is a document that gets published on the Welsh Government website in January, it's clearly going to be really important for practitioners, but actually how well understood is it by the learners themselves? And I know that's that'll be mediated perhaps through practitioners, but that, you know, how accessible is the documentation for them to understand the aspirations of the new curriculum? What does that mean from the four purposes down? So it feels, I think the learner voice, the pupil voice stuff has been very, very clear, and I think there has been substantial engagement with the Children's Commissioner for Wales.
So there have been specific events specifically for young people to feed in. There has also been next week, for instance, I will be engaging with the members of the Youth Parliament, who one of their areas of priority is life skills in the curriculum. So checking in with them. We've also worked with, for instance, the Electoral Reform Society that have done a piece of work with children about citizenship education and how they feel at the moment citizenship education is lacking. We have had extensive feedback from young people with regards to the inadequacy of the current provision of relationship and sexuality education in the current curriculum, and the need for that to be transformed in our new curriculum. You're absolutely right, and there should be a clue in the fact that the curriculum is divided up into not just areas of learning, but areas of learning and experience. Now, experience is there for a very specific reason, so we're looking at a broader-based type of learning, not just simply something that happens in the classroom. We also know, as she said, that for children from socio-disadvantaged backgrounds or other children who may, for instance, have caring responsibilities or other responsibilities, access to those extracurricular activities can make all the difference. So what are we doing about that? So this summer we had 21 of our 22 local authorities involved in our food and fun clubs that are available in the summer holidays. So that's 4 weeks of activity. It's targeted at FSM children, but it's not exclusive for FSM children. That is 4 weeks of education, nutrition, and a lot of fun during the school holidays. We also established this last year the PDG Access Fund. Primarily, that resource is there to support with the costs of uniform, but actually parents can use a PDG Access grant to help with the costs of whether it's a Scout uniform or a Girl Guide uniform or the rucksack that you need to go on your Duke of Edinburgh expedition or those pair of hiking boots that you need to go and do that activity that you would never normally as a parent buy them once and they never use them again, you know, that kind of scenario. And we're also this year investing money in local authorities to establish kit stores. So actually that local families can borrow pieces of kit and equipment to enable children to avail themselves of activities that may be available in their school. We also see innovative practice with our PDG grants. If you think of PDG, this year we'll invest over £91 million in the education of some of our most disadvantaged children. If you think of schools here in Swansea, they're using that PDG grant to pay for membership of the Glamorgan Youth Theatre or pay for membership of the Glamorgan Orchestra, knowing that those children would not avail themselves of those opportunities if their parents had to pay the membership fee. They're buying bus passes for their children to ensure that their children can get around the city to be able to access those kinds of activities. So there's a range of ways in which we recognise that some children will be at a disadvantage, what that means for their educational outcomes, and taking some very practical steps to support schools, local authorities and individual families to address some of those issues. And there is certainly a role for third sector voluntary organisations to help support schools deliver these aspects of the curriculum. There's definitely scope there.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with the thrust of the question, what lies behind the question that you're asking. I do think we can never do enough in terms of ensuring that young people feel that they have an ownership of the curriculum as well. When I was doing the fieldwork for Successful Futures, I was very clear. I was in about 60 schools over the course of a 2 or 3 month period, and in every school I talked to staff, but I also talked to young people and just asked both groups about their aspirations for what they would get from school education. Children's Commissioner sits on the independent advisory group that I chair, and we've engaged again through her network of young people. They've engaged with the independent advisory group. On the second point, I think it's so important. It's what I meant earlier about standards, because one of the unfortunate, I think, byproducts of the very strong and understandable and laudable focus on standards has been for those young people who struggle, they've tended to get a reduced curriculum. So we've focused more and more and more on a narrow subset of the curriculum. And it's worse, that becomes a kind of grad grind experience for those young people. So those 4 purposes, and thinking about standards in relation to those 4 purposes, are precisely designed to address the issue you're talking about. So those young people move forward into whatever they do next, much more broadly, with a much broader base in terms of engaging with the future.
First.
Diolch yn fawr. Cedric Bird, Ysgol Cwmbronville. Thank you for the tools and the opportunities that you've provided for our children. And we're excited about taking this forward. And it's certainly true that we will not be able to deliver this effectively without partners. I'm thinking of the other way around. How can we, in this room, who've thought a lot about this, to come to an understanding, help the wider community, commerce, business, industry, understand what's happening, so that well-equipped children go out, but they aren't accused of not being fit for the world. I'm not seeing it as a problem. My question is, how can we help the process of understanding and advertising, etc.?
I think there's a huge role to play in both ways. You know, I have organisations that come to tell me that, oh, people that leave the Welsh education system, they're not fit for purpose, we can't employ them, we have to spend loads of our own money getting them. And I say to them, okay, so what conversations are you having with your local schools, or your local FE providers to ensure, or your local universities to ensure that what's going on in that organisation really is going to meet your needs, as well as meeting the needs of children. And, you know, there's lots of ways, and one of the things that, if I'm honest, I've not yet cracked is a more systematic approach to business relations with schools. Now, there is some excellent good practice in some small pockets. We can think of some individual businesses and companies that do great work with our local schools, but it is not strategic and it's not systematic. You know, so when we're looking at the world of work, is one of the golden threads that goes through each of the AOLEs. So being able to tell children there's a relevance to what you're learning, because actually in the future there are lots of interesting careers that you could do if you've got an interest in this subject. But to make that come alive for children, it would be great to have businesses and people who do those kind of work actually in school and making it real and taking the children to see those things. And in terms of aspirations, we know that children as young as 6 begin to form what their careers are going to be when they're older, so they can't start too young. We also need help explaining to parents. Again, one of the really challenging aspects is, we know we've been strong on communication with the sector, but actually now, how do we ensure that there is a true understanding for parents about why these changes are happening and what it will mean? And that's really important to me around the sustainability of the changes that we're making, because politics is fickle. You know, we need to make sure that there is a desire within the profession, but there's also a desire amongst the public and parents. So if somebody wants to come along and unpick all of this, actually the outcry is no. This is what we want, and this is what we need for our children. And we're really going to have to help schools help us get those messages out. And of course, children will be key to that, because children going home excited about their learning is the best possible advert that they can be for a parent. So if your child comes home and is just gabbling about, you know, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this, then you know that something is going well. But we do need to find new ways of having those conversations with those that perhaps have not engaged in the process today. And there's a real opportunity, because of the flexibility in the curriculum, there's a real opportunity for the development of real local curricula that are really going to meet the needs in a particular locality. And there's a real opportunity for employers to get in and have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think specifically for science and tech, we've keenly felt this around from a careers perspective, and you know, I suppose what kind of jobs and industries are big in Wales now, and we'd like to be kind of big in the future. So I don't think I wouldn't be proposing some kind of central brokerage house to link employers to schools. But I think, you know, we said back in the ICT review 6 years ago that there has to be much more meaningful and sustained engagement between schools and FE and colleges with employers of varying sizes. So it's not just about coming in and giving a talk about, I'm an engineer, I do this. Actually, how can you meaningfully support provision? That might be through new qualifications, it might be through meaningful work experience, it might actually be mentorship of projects and a variety of different, actually meaningfully supporting learning and teaching from a CSR perspective. So I think there are going to be opportunities going forwards, and particularly when that critique around, was it lamenting the employment skills or their readiness for work when they leave the education system. I think that has been unfair in the past, and to be honest, I think that's the same for schools as it is for colleges, as it is for universities. I think we all kind of hear that. So actually, thinking about those work-ready skills or those competencies for sort of life and for work, I think the prominence of those and how that is grounded and supported through the kind of 3 to 16 curriculum is going to be really, really important. But I think there's a real big opportunity. But I suppose we want to have the parity of offering for schools in Cardiff as it is in Ceredigion. So you want to make sure that all schools across Wales can access this.
Yeah, just very briefly, but I think it's so incredibly important. I think parents quite naturally are nervous about change in terms of if what's happening in school doesn't look like what they expect a school to look like and what they expect to happen in the school. Quite naturally, they get nervous about that. So I think particularly, once we get beyond 2020 and once there is something firm to talk about, I think trying to excite parents about the reform. So it's something, in my experience in talking to parental groups, governance groups and so on, is they actually do get excited about it. They do want to see it as something that's important. I think that there's a stage 2020 onwards where we have to make sure that we take the broader community with us.
I'm Mary Gajan. I'm one of a group of academics here at Swansea University who do a lot of outreach around working with children about science. And Cedric, we had your year 8s with us today and they were fantastic. So with that in mind, you talked a lot about universities responding to the curriculum in terms of supporting existing teachers and supporting future teachers. But I guess I just wanted to ask another how can we help question. What would your biggest vision be for how universities in Wales, who get a significant number of our students each year from Wales, what would your vision be for how we can best respond and support this new curriculum?
Well, there are just a myriad of ways, isn't it? And I've witnessed your work in creating a spark for children about how exciting science can be. And from my perspective, having women do that is also really important. So what does a scientist look like? They look like Mary, as well as looking like Tom. So I think that's equally important. I think one of the best things that, one of the strengths of a university and your best asset, if I may say, are incredibly bright, sparky young people who have a passion about the subject that they're studying. And I think how we can deploy those, and Swansea already does some of that, getting its science students out and about into schools to support science. And we have other university departments sending their MFL students out and about, enthusing other children to learn about MFL. I think it is really important about supporting not just ITE, but also the ongoing professional development of teachers, especially if we look to move the teaching profession to be a research-led profession and how we make that a reality. So that's our vision for the teaching profession, that teachers will be action researchers in their own classroom. But that's something that some people find really exciting, but lots and lots of people find really, really daunting. And I think as research institutions yourself, you've got lots of skills and expertise, and you can take away some of the fear around that, and you can help support people do that better. How many of you are governors? How many of you are governors of a school but are not a parent in that school? There are a few of you. What better way to help develop and deliver the national mission by stepping up to the plate? We have a shortage of school governors, by actually saying, okay, my contribution to the national mission is that I'm going to be a governor in my local school. And I think from a professional development point of view, that's a wonderful professional development opportunity for lots and lots of professional people, because being a school governor is not to be a cheerleader for a school, it's to be able to understand data, it's to be able, to drive systematic change. So actually, as a younger professional, I think it's a wonderful career development opportunity by stepping up, and we need more people to do that. So how many of the faculty of Swansea University are governors of schools for which they are not a parent? Well done, sir. Well done, you. I'm not allowed to have national mission badges. Like Trump has got those terrible MAGA hats. I did want making Welsh education great again, or I'm part of the mission merch, and I've been told no. But if I had one, I would give you one, sir. You can have one. So there's lots and lots of ways in which I think the university sector can help us in all aspects of the mission. There's no one single way where our institutions of higher education, who have a responsibility to their place and to their nation. And I'm not saying that Swansea doesn't do that. Swansea does a very good job of that, actually. Swansea does a good job. But I think there are lots of ways in which you can help us.
Very conscious of time, running over. They are very conscious of time because there's something they have eventually need to get another
Thanks very much. My name's Ron McLean. I'm a director with ACOM. A couple of questions, really, and it was interesting just picking up on how businesses and how schools engage together. And through the construction process, and been to a number of seminars, through the construction process, you probably saw a lot of engagement with the main contractor and with consultants. And I think it's how we capture that model and take that forward post your new school. So pupils get a great experience of what they do. And that kind of takes me into, I suppose, my point about where Careers Wales sits, where careers guidance within the new curriculum sits as well. Because what we do quite a lot of school projects, and it's quite clear that pupils don't know what we do, which is, if they haven't got parents who are involved in it, they might not have that. And I just wonder how, at what level do we start plugging careers education into the curriculum? And that's one maybe to ponder. My original question before the Brobumble question was actually from Professor Donaldson, really, about how we make robust accountability. And as someone who's not a teacher, I hear about Estin and I hear about the joys of inspection, and I wonder how we make that robust accountability less oppressive.
Can I just start with your first question? You said what age? Well, actually age 3, because this is a 3 to 16 curriculum, and each area of learning and experience, actually, as I said, there's a golden thread of careers and work. We know for some children, you need to give them a reason for what they're learning, and actually relating it to something very practical about what this may be able to help them to do. But we do know for a whole variety of reasons that maybe careers and information has not been as strong and as good as we would want it to be right the way across the system. And that's not to the individuals involved in Careers Wales. It's been a tough time for financially, and those guys have borne quite a brunt of some of the austerity measures. But we are currently doing a pilot on a reformed approach to careers. It's called the Gatsby Model. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Gatsby Model of careers advice. We're currently trialling this at the moment in one local authority. It's early days yet, but already the feedback from that is positive and strong around improved information, careers and advice within the school setting. And we look to evaluate that, and resources willing, I think we'd like to roll that out then across the country. And it really is the gold standard for improved careers, information and advice. But I'll ask Graham about his ideas on accountability.
Yes, the Minister and the Chief Inspector asked me to do a review of Estin. And the remit of the review was precisely trying to answer that question. How can inspection best serve the new curriculum in a way that helps to make it a reality in schools? Because inspection can have positive effects, it can have negative effects in terms of the way it goes, and there's a lot of myths around inspection too. So the title of that report was A Learning Inspectorate. And the big message of that report was we must be very careful about the use of labels. We must be very careful about, and exactly the same with children. If you tell a child that they are not good at something, they'll end up not being good at it. If you tell a school they're not any good, then of course it has a terrible effect on morale. If you tell a school they're excellent, it can induce complacency. And an awful lot of effort in the accountability system goes on to delivering a verdict, the label that you stick on a school. And actually, that's the least important bit of any accountability system. What we need to do is to have an approach to accountability that is about how we collectively learn, how the school learns to get better, how we create the context where the drive to get better is built into the process of accountability. In my experience, I should declare an interest. I'm a former head of the Inspectorate in Scotland, so I know a little bit about it. And no longer being in that role, I look back and can reflect on things I would have done differently in terms of the way in which I ran an organisation at that point. But I think the general message is if we can use learning as the driver rather than fear as the driver, we're much more likely to get high quality.
And can I say, it's not just Estyn that has a role to play in this. Welsh Government has a massive role to play in this, in how we make judgments about whether a school is regarded as a good school or a bad school. So, and we're in the process of changing that currently. So we've changed in primaries around some of the data that is published. We've changed our approaches to categorisation, which used to be purely based on data rather than context. And this summer, for instance, we got rid of the level 2+ scores, which have just driven performance in our secondary schools for so many years. So what mattered is if you got 5 children, 5 GCSEs, including their maths and their English at a C or above, tick, good school. But when you think about it, if that child came to you at 11 with the potential to get an A star, and you get them a C, actually, that's not a success, is it? If you've got a child that can barely come through your door in the morning, but actually you get that child through school and they leave with some qualifications, in our old system, we deemed your school a failure. And the result of that meant we concentrated our teachers' efforts on a very, very small cohort of children on the CD boundary, because that's where you were going to push your performance measures up, to the exclusion of our more able and talented children. You know, those B students that could maybe have got an A, you know, or those C students that could have got a B. And we also ignored those students that were really potentially struggling because, well, they're never going to get a C, so we can just put them to one side. Not that schools did a lot of that, but the temptation was certainly there to do a lot of that. So actually moving to a cap point score, which we've done at the moment, which means that everybody's performance counts, every child counts in the system, you know, so it's not just Estyn that drive the accountability issues, it's also Welsh Government, and we have to look to ourselves to make sure we get a better balance of how we make judgments on scores. And the qualifications are important. Of course they're important, but there is so much more that goes on in a school than just qualifications. Issues around well-being, issues around support for disadvantaged learners, or that child with additional learning needs, the contribution that your pupils are making to their wider community. At the moment, there's no way of gauging any of that, and we've got to have an accountability system that takes a much more holistic approach at what makes a successful school, you know, bearing in mind that exams, you know, qualifications are important, but there are other things that go on in a school which are valuable, and at the moment we don't give a lot of weight to.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Towie from Swansea University School of Education. Have you got any thoughts on how the new curriculum will map against the foundation phase? My area is early years, so 0 to 8. But obviously those children 3 to 7 are going to have 2 curriculums. Any thoughts about how that's going to work in terms of how the framework will map against the new curriculum?
Okay, so you won't have 2 curricula. You're going to have one curriculum. I mean, and I suspect for all the change that there is going to be for teachers, for those who are expert in early years and foundation phase, there's probably the least amount of pedagogically than there is for everybody else in the system. And you go to lots of primary schools and you talk about the new curriculum, and many of them say, well, this is what we do anyway, especially in foundation phase. So I think, actually, in our primary settings, this will lead to a continuation of the principles that underpin foundation phase right the way through to a child's career at 11. At this moment, we have, you know, the principles of the foundation phase, and all of a sudden at 7, we go, right, okay, now we're going to do something else, and the approach to your education is going to be different. So actually, I think it won't be 2 curricula. There'll be a single curricula from 3 to 16, and I think, you know, much of what we've learned about foundation phase and many of the approaches that are used in foundation phase actually will see themselves replicated as we go towards the education of older children. So I think your foundation phase has probably got the least journey, I think.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, I think one of the issues following consultation that's being looked at just now is that relationship between what's happening in the early years and progression step 1 in the new framework. So there's a lot of hard thinking going on to make sure that what we don't inadvertently do is to have progression step 1, you know, giving the impression that you need a lot of formality prior to that, and hence running counter to the whole philosophy of foundation phase. The Minister says the intention was quite the reverse of that. We have to make sure inadvertently we're not creating a perverse effect in the way in which the curriculum was designed.
Okay, thank you for your questions. And thank you for answering them. 3 things. 1, these cards, when you fill them in, hopefully nicely, there's lots of little boxes in the front. You just drop them in. Or if you can't get, just leave them lying around, because my team will be cleaning up everywhere, which brings me to my second point. They would just love it if you take your dirty cup away with you, right? So they have less cleaning to do. And make it the cup that you take in your car every day. Yes, you're welcome to take that away. And the third thing is to invite Alma up to the front, as she's my fellow of the Learning Society, and she's going to act on behalf of the Learning Society to offer the final words of thanks.
Has to be the smallest microphone in the world. Anyway, please don't take any photographs. It comes to me as a fellow of the Learning Society to say thank you to our speakers here this evening for giving us such a rich and entertaining, at times, insight into the new curriculum. So, Farron, if I can start with you and say thank you for your hospitality and the wonderful yellow cups that we'll all take home with us. And sorry, Bangor, but the wonderful Welsh cakes and the sort of refreshments. Minister, thank you. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. I'm afraid that... I can't get that song out of my head right now. I don't know about you. So thank you for that, Minister, but thank you also for being here. I know that there's so many pressures on your time, and to give up an evening to be with us has been fantastic. Graham, as always, eloquent, inspiring, and passionate about the new curriculum. And Tom, it's a pleasure to have you as part of the School of Education at Swansea. I now know where you are. But to my colleagues also from the Swansea School of Education, we can solve quite a lot of the professional development need problems that you have. And we have a new PGC that if anyone wants to sign up right now, we can deliver this new curriculum together. The OECD, as you know, were actually in Wales a few weeks ago. And they said to me, so what do you think about the new curriculum? So I said, well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I didn't actually. I said, do you know what? I think Wales is now a system on the move. And it's a system we can be proud of. It's a system that will deliver success for every child in every setting. And we should be not cautiously optimistic, we should be very optimistic. Can you put your hands together and please thank our panelists. And I think that's what you'd call it's a wrap. So please feel free to move to your vehicles or any wine bars that you have in mind. Thank you.